I sprayed every single assault rifle in Rainbow Six Siege at a wall to make a tier list comparing recoil, damage, and other quirks. Data for this tier list was collected by spraying at a wall from 8 meters with each AR. They all had a foregrip and a suppressor attached. The foregrip, since it is the more common underbarrel attach, and the suppressor to demonstrate what the recoil is like unmodified, regardless of personal preference for the flash hider, compensator, or muzzle brake. It's important to note that this training dummy did not go to Keeps.com. Keeps.com is a service that helps men keep their hair. It's something that affects the majority of men. 2 out of 3 guys are going to experience some form of male pattern baldness by the time they reach age 35. Keeps enters into the equation to make treatment for this sort of thing a lot less confusing. The basic idea being the ability to do everything from the comfort of your computer desk. You don't have to drive to a doctor's office. Keeps will get you in touch with somebody that'll take a look at what's going on and give you a personally prescribed treatment plan. And Keeps doesn't just offer hair loss treatment, they also offer shampoos and conditioners to take care of the hair that you already have. It's better to act sooner rather than later when it comes to hair loss. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off of your first order, go to keeps.com/Gregor or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/Gregor. And thanks again to Keeps for sponsoring this video. I took a screen cap of each spray from the weapons, then placed dots for every single shot placement over the course of those sprays to make a visual representation of every assault rifle's recoil in Rainbow Six Siege. On average, the recoil of an assault rifle in Rainbow Six Siege is a V-Lone shirt. Okay, but in all seriousness, you can see that Thermite's 5.56 has some noticeable leftward deviation. In fact, leftward deviation at all is uncommon for rifles in Rainbow Six Siege. When it came down to stats measured, I wanted to look at the recoil compared to the average pattern, as well as my own personal feel in terms of how difficult it was to control it. Then I measured the shots to kill for 1 armors, 2 armors, and 3 armors, 100 HP, 110, and 125 respectively. Rate of fire as well as magazine capacity also dictates placement on the tier list, but only when contextualized by the other stats, considering that rate of fire is a plus, but if the gun has really low damage, that's going to be a knock for it. Recoil also affects the weapon's ability to hit tight groups at a distance, so if the weapon has a ton of recoil and a high rate of fire, that's great at close range, but not so great from far away. The 416 isn't particularly good at anything when we compare it to other weapons in its class. It has a fair amount of upward kick that is a pain to control and a low damage rating of 38, plus a middle-of-the-pack fire rate. But you'll need 4 for Zoph, who has an M762, so from personal experience, I can't really stand using it anymore to the point where I prefer to run the M870. It's not that the damage output is bad, it's just not high enough to justify a small magazine, kicking like a mule, and a fire rate that isn't high enough to make it a point of contention against attackers equipped with weapons like the C7E. Jaeger is outgunned in a 1v1 duel compared to just about any of his peers. At this point, I don't think giving him a 1.5 is a bad option. I truly mean it. Now, if Jaeger had the Commando, it's a different story. Very, very good damage output, 48 to be exact, so even rooked or docked opponents will be hurting if you tag them with the Commando. Not to mention, it's very easy to control. The only major downside here is the rate of fire, but since the recoil is so low, you can get follow-up shots if that's really necessary. High damage and good controllability means it translates well to long-range gunfighting as well. So it's very capable in skilled hands from just about any range, giving it one of the higher ratings in the tier list, in my opinion. Thermite's rifle is unique for its decent amount of leftward pull, but the upward climb isn't enough to make it unusable. The high damage rating of 47 will give you a 3-shot pick against 3 armors, while once again posing a threat to distant rook and docked defenders. Much like the Commando, the only thing holding it back is the fire rate of 690, which it shares. It's not as good as the Commando in my opinion due to a bit more horizontal recoil, but it's not enough to separate it onto a tier of its own. If it weren't for rate of fire, the AK-12 would be screwed. It's quite quick, 850. But right now the AK-12 has a good deal of climb and rightward sway, plus a low damage rating of 40. That doesn't really make it a better option compared to a weapon like the C7E. 4 shots to take down Maestro, so that's why it's not going in S tier. But it's still solid in right hands, so if you're cracked on the sticks, go ahead. It used to be the best assault rifle in the game, but it's been reined in considerably since Ubisoft has a policy of not adjusting fire rate for weapon balancing, and recoil and damage are what happened to the AK-12. Something unique about the AK-74, it has a 40-round mag, which is kind of a big deal, especially in terms of Nomad's role as a backline kind of character meant to hold the line. The less time she spends reloading, the more time she can keep her gun up, and it'll help you reliably pick off highly armored opponents. Something that is worth mentioning as we go through the course of the video is that the damage rating is pretty important for attackers considering the amount of heavily armored defenders the attackers will be facing, as well as the presence of Rook and Dock. A high damage rating also means the fall-off is not going to hurt you as much, giving you more flexibility in terms of engagements. The AK isn't particularly amazing at anything, but it's solid and reliable enough in the parts where it counts, which gives it its B tier rating. The AR-33 doesn't have great damage output, and the fire rate is middle of the pack. What the AR-33 does have is very, very easy to control recoil that doesn't deviate to the left or to the right that much. I think the horizontal deviation is an important argument while we compare weapons among one another, because horizontal recoil is a lot more difficult to account for than upward climb, and the AR-33 doesn't have much of either of these things. Since the damage isn't particularly amazing, I can't put it much higher compared to its peers, but with a moderately high rate of fire and good controllability, the AR-33 is a serviceable weapon that will get the job done for Thatcher and Flores. The ARX-200 would go in A tier if it had a bigger magazine and a slightly quicker reload speed. But as it stands, it's just a version of weapons that exist above it like the Commando for no particularly big benefit. Other weapons like the ARX exist with comparable damage and bigger magazines. This weapon is designed the way it is because Nomad and Yana have great gadgets. Anything much more and those operators might be a little broken, so it makes sense that it is the way it is. Not bad, although I know people will feel like the B tier is bad, even though it's not. The AUG A2 is easy to control with a respectable 3-shot Maestro melt and a fire rate that isn't terribly low, 720. On IQ, you also have the option of a plethora of scopes. It's easy to put it in A tier because there really isn't a single glaring weakness to talk about aside from the slightly below average rate of fire, but every other aspect about the thing is so good that it's hard to place it much lower. The C70 is one of my favorites in the game. It doesn't suffer from the 40 damage ailment of the AK-12. That 42 damage rating gives it the oomph it needs to 3-shot Maestro, not to mention the recoil is a lot more linear, and as a result it's easier to correct. With an above average rate of fire, good damage output, and good handling, the C70 is an S-tier rifle for those who can get a hold of the upward climb. The C8 Safe for Work has a high rate of fire, but like the AK-12, it doesn't 3-shot 3-armors. However, it does have less horizontal recoil, which in my opinion isn't enough to elevate it to S tier since the C70 has more damage output, but the C8 has enough good stats to keep it above the rest of the pack. Big fire rate propaganda has infiltrated the Siege community, and they would have you believe that the F2 is still goated, when it can't hit the same group that an L85 can hit from spawn peeking range. The F2 has high rate of fire. That's it. It really kind of has the same damage output as the Commando. The Commando has slower rate of fire, but the F2's 37 damage rating is so low that it's comparable, with infinitely more recoil and a smaller mag. It has a 25-round mag, and it'll chew through that 25-round mag faster than other weapons might. If you're Bolo, I'd put it higher, but Bolo doesn't need to watch this video. The F2 just doesn't really have that whole, the longer ranges thing covered at all. And I know that there's a lot of F2 lovers out there. We're talking high risk, high reward when other weapons have better trade-offs, like the C8 or the C7. Those guns have high rate of fire, but they're easier to control, and they do better damage. The F2 is significantly overrated. The F90 is a G36 that's a bit more difficult to control. While there's many good aspects about the weapon in terms of its handling, the low damage rating of 38 in my opinion holds it back considerably and makes it difficult for the weapon to fight in the weight class of competition like the AUG A2, which has just a tiny bit slower rate of fire but more damage to compensate. Likewise, the G36 is an F90 that's a lot easier to control. It doesn't do anything particularly amazing, it just kind of has middle-of-the-pack damage output, good controllability, and a slightly above average fire rate, so it's not bad, it's just also not particularly good. Dare I say, I hate this word. Mid? Mid. But it's not mid in a bad way, you know? It's just average. Can we bring back the word average? Okay? Alright? Gosh, mid has such a negative connotation. 47 damage, and it's a laser beam. It has less recoil than the Commando and Thermite's gun. It's the L85A2. Look at the damage output and controllability the L85 has from even the longest distances. The L85 doesn't require much pull down at all. It hits like a truck, and if you don't hit the head, which you can easily, you can still melt a gun Maestro in 3 shots. The combination of laser beam recoil and blistering damage output means it's easy to hit headshots, or really about anything at all, with the L85. This thing is freelo. I love the L85. The M4 is also goated. A 44 damage rating is just enough to make this thing melt Maestro, and it hardly has any recoil to speak of aside from rightward kick halfway through the spray. The M4 combines great damage output with controllability and an average rate of fire. You'll get very similar T2K compared to the L85, but a slightly higher chance to hit the head. Either way, the least good thing about the M4 is the fire rate, which is still average, and every other aspect about the weapon is great. So it's hard to place this thing any higher than S tier. The M762 is in the same boat as the M4 with a damage rating of 45, but it has a little bit more muzzle climb overall, and the fire rate is slightly lower. So those are the only things really keeping the M762 from being S tier. Honestly, if I could, I'd give the M762 its own, like, A+ tier, but since the M4 does have the controllability aspect on the M762 beat, I'm going to keep it at A for a great primary option, regardless of the comparison being made there. The only good thing about Blackbeard's rifle is that it has no recoil. That's it. The damage rating on it stinks, the magazine is small, the fire rate is extremely low, it gives you no recoil, and that's the only redeeming quality. It doesn't have stats high enough to make it compete with other weapons, and I can never see myself picking it over other options. The Mk17 is designed to keep Blackbeard from being a menace, and I'm okay with that. It's in its own category, and that's okay. The Para 308 is a hard-hitting, easy-to-control weapon with a standard-sized mag, but the rate of fire is even lower than the L85. And here's the kicker. It has just a little bit more recoil compared to the L85. I'm not gonna lie, 650 is pretty low, guys, and I know 670 on the L85 is low as well, but the L85 really has no recoil to speak of, so it can get away with that a little bit easier. The Para has a little bit of, upward kick, and I can't put it in the same category as the M762, but I can put it in the same category as the other B-tier guns. Not bad, just not amazing. At one point, I would have put the POF9 in the same category as Blackbeard's rifle, but thanks to a recent recoil buff, it has avoided assault rifle purgatory. It has a middle-of-the-pack rate of fire of 740, but it has a 50-round drum mag, which means you can go from one engagement to the next, to the next, to the next, without having to reload. The damage output is not good, and that's what's keeping it low. It's the only assault rifle in our tier list that does 4-shot kills to 2 armors, which for assault rifles is very bad. It's quite bad. Actually, when you take that average rate of fire and couple it with the wimpy damage output, that's just bad damage output. So the only thing it has going for it is a 50-round drum mag. Woohoo. The R4C is a weird one. I was under the impression it wasn't any good anymore. After going back and looking at the recent recoil buff that it got, I can safely say that the R4C is back. Had I been working with the original recoil, we would not be having this conversation. But it has a blisteringly high rate of fire of 860, while the damage output is not super crazy, 39. The rate of fire does help it a little bit, so you will do more damage faster, and you might hit a headshot. Just do not try to engage at medium to long range. Stay within, about 8 to 15 meters or so, and you'll have a solid entry fragging weapon. This one might be controversial, but I think the SC3000K has the perfect blend of controllability to make shots easier to hit, rate of fire to make headshots easier to hit, while increasing the damage output, and damage output altogether. You want a pre-nerf AK-12, the SC3000K will get you that, baby, and the only thing it suffers from is a 25-round mag, but who cares? A 45 damage rating is nothing to slouch at. It's got damage, it's got fire rate, it's got controllability. What else do you need? I love my tactical tuna boat. It's S tier, and I hope you'll agree too. The Spear 308, I don't know why. I thought this thing had low recoil, like it has decent damage output. Its rate of fire is slow, so it has to have something to offset that, right? Low recoil, no. Actually, it has higher recoil than the AK-12. So thank you, Patreon member, Practical, for pointing this out and saving me from sheer embarrassment. It has solid damage output at 3 shots Maestro, but the rate of fire is kind of low, and the recoil is, marginally high. It's not crazy, but it does have a little bit of kick, and you do need to pull down a little bit. So we're not talking, the best gun in the game, but not the worst one either. All right, I've done this one before. Guys, look at the recoil deviation on this stupid thing. That's right. Are you looking at this right? That's right. The Type 89 has the most amount of horizontal recoil deviation for assault rifles, period. Now, I know the vertical climb is not that high, but if you go past 5 to 6 rounds in a spray, forget about it. Plus a small-ass 20-round mag that punishes you for full reloading by needing to pull the charging handle, so you get a long reload. And 40 damage. I know that everyone has been propagandized by big fire rate. Other weapons have high fire rate, like the R4C, like the C8, like the C7, and they don't suffer from the handicaps the Type 89 does. There's absolutely nothing keeping you from fragging out with the Type 89. but she has a bearing 9, and she has a really good gadget. This is a balanced decision. If I had to pick another weapon on Habana, I would not pick the Type 89. It has too many things holding it back in terms of ease of use. Sorry guys, if it had a 25 round mag, sure. The 20 rounds is done deliberately to hold the gun back, and that's what Ubisoft wants. You know what magazine size is objectively good? The Gears of War gun, the V308. This thing cranks. How much does it crank? It cranks a 3-shot Maestro frag. While the rate of fire is slightly below average, the V308 makes up for it with laser beam recoil and a 50-round drum mag. Look at how easy this thing is to manage. Just look at the spray pattern itself. This thing couldn't be any easier to use. In fact, it might just be the easiest full auto primary weapon in the game to use. There's basically no downside here aside from the, the slightly slower rate of fire. But 700 is still okay. And it has enough upside to make up for that discrepancy, in my opinion. Chiefly, the controllability. If we're talking like AK-74 controllability, yeah, it's going to be a lot lower. But since the damage output is so freaking high on this weapon, and you can hold down the trigger forever, and you can go from one engagement to the next without having to reload, it's the closest thing you'll get to the LMG meta that we had. The V308 is a very good primary weapon, and I'll put it in S tier. Here is the final version in full. Let me know why your favorite gun is lower than it should be in the comments down below. And thank you for watching. Deuces.